But first, is the Albanese government actually now falling apart? Has the Prime Minister lost control after his humiliating loss over The Voice? Because today, Treasurer Jim Chalmers made his big Kevin Rudd statement, a real look at me, committing the government to his great global warming crusade, changing the entire way that we power this economy.
I really believe that the net zero transformation will be the defining piece of the defining decade. And whether we succeed or fail in these turbulent 20s will in large part be determined by how we maximise our advantages and leverage our strengths when it comes to energy in our economy.
It seems to me Chalmers is auditioning to be Labor's next Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd. In fact, copying Rudd.
Climate change is the great moral challenge of our generation.
That's sure arrogance. I mean, Chalmers is speaking outside his portfolio in a way that suggests he wants to be the Prime Minister after Anthony Albanese. Maybe instead of Albanese. And that's because a commitment as big as that is properly made by the Prime Minister, especially when Chalmers in his big speech was committing the government to now double down on what's clearly a disaster. Its global warming push to make us get 82% of our electricity from renewables like wind and solar in just 7 years, and to build 40 big wind turbines every month until then. As I've told you for some time now, that switch is in huge strife. We've got huge delays, we've got huge cost overruns, we've got huge opposition now to wind farms, plus, of course, electricity shortages coming up. But Chalmers today said, well, let's just pour even more money into this, because he now admits, yes, it's true, Labor's energy transition is actually running short, as I've been saying.
Without more decisive action across all levels of government, working with investors and industry and communities, the energy transition could fall short of what the country needs.
But are you okay with that? I mean, government spending even more of your money on this net zero transition that will in fact not change the climate. Are you okay with paying more and more for your electricity when it's still running short anyway? But perhaps the really amazing thing about that speech today is that Chalmers seems to be a slow learner. I'm just asking myself, didn't he see Kevin Rudd's leadership destroyed by preaching how climate change was a great moral challenge and then backing off when voters went, no, not really? Didn't he see Labor Prime Minister Julia Gillard's leadership also destroyed when she made a global warming promise too that she didn't keep?
There will be no carbon tax under the government I lead.
Didn't Chalmers then notice Liberal Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull? Also, he was getting sacked too by his own party after trying to push it to join the global warming cult. And surely Chalmers knows that Anthony Albanese now is getting smashed for making his own global warming promise that neither Albanese nor Chalmers can deliver.
Reducing power prices by $275.
By 2025, $275 a year.
I mean, getting on the global warming bandwagon is deadly for political leaders, yet there's Chalmers again promising even more of what's failing and what the public is now rejecting. Now, last night I missed something when I told you about some of the many people's revolts now against wind farms, like the one near Newcastle, protesters against a huge wind farm off the coast. In Wollongong, rallies last weekend against an offshore wind farm there too. In Tasmania, a successful campaign against a wind farm near the beautiful outcrop called the Nut, and so on. Now, it stuns me that Chalmers, with all these protesters, plus more that I listed last night, today says, well, let's go on even harder and faster. And particularly when these protests are only going to get worse. Because the thing that I missed, for instance, is our biggest offshore wind farm, planned at least, just needing the government's approval. This will have 200 giant wind turbines, more than 1/4 kilometre high, spread 1 to 2 kilometres apart, just off the coast, over a huge area off Western Australia, Geograph Bay, which is actually famous for its whales. In fact, the Sydney Morning Herald last year said researchers think there is an increase in females returning to what might have been historical calving grounds, pre-whaling, in places like this same Geograph Bay. So how long will those whales keep coming back when the pile driving starts to build these turbines? And why aren't green groups so keen on Save the Whale paying attention yet? In fact, I'm predicting another revolt against that wind farm too. Plus many others that will be forced on us, with Chalmers insisting on more and faster, telling us this is the defining piece in this defining decades, says this dividing treasurer. I wonder whether Albanese is really on board with all this, or are his ministers now just brushing him aside as a man broken by the defeat of the voice? And the way Chalmers spoke today, I'd be worried if I were Albanese.